ask if there is anybody who does not speak Italian. In this case, we will keep going speaking English. Otherwise, we'll be simply 7. Are you okay with Italian, or should we keep speaking English?
Sorry if I interrupt you. Maybe it is better to speak in English because the registration will be available on the channel of the...
Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, in this case, we can start, Emilia. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Donato Romano, for the ones who does not know me. I am member of the board of the Bio-Based and Applied Economics Journal, which is the official journal of the Italian Association of Agriculture and Applied Economics. And welcome to this second webinar of the 10th anniversary series. In fact, 2021 marked the 10th anniversary of both the association and the journal. And we decided together, the association and the journal board, to launch a series of anniversary article, whose scope was objective was to try to analyze some of a selection of topics that we deem quite important to be discussed. We already went through one of these meetings. It was on the end of January this year, where we presented the first two articles, two papers, one on agri-food policy by Alan Matthews, and the other one on behavioral issues in agri-food system by Jutta Rosen. Today, we will proceed with other two articles that have been already published. The first one is by Davide Viaggi and colleagues on the economics of bioeconomy, that has been published on the 3rd issue of 2021. And the second one by Francesco Mantino, whose article has been published on the 4th issue, 2021, which is on rural areas between locality and global networks. Other articles will follow during this year. The topics are, as I would say, disparate as risk management, vulnerability and resilience, system thinking and system change, food, nutrition and health, trade and globalization, and we will probably have also an article that will deal with sort of assessment of what has been the contribution to the profession of BAE over these 10 years. Now, I don't want to take too much time to the speakers. Let me just emphasize a couple of features that, going through the paper, I find common between the two. The first one is that although those have been written by economists for their own nature, dealing with the bioeconomy from one side and the rural or local development on the other side, those are typical interdisciplinary topics, and you can recognize over there also this different perspective that contribute to the evolution of the idea on these topics. And the second thing that I would like to emphasize is that if you go through the article, you will see that there is not only an account of the evolution of the concepts and the idea or the applications within these two fields, but also an attempt by the authors to try to provide their own interpretation of where are we going right now and what has been the evolution of this discipline. Now, the rules of the game this afternoon are the following. Each speaker will have 20 minutes or so, and then we will leave the floor for questions and answer. So I would like to invite the first speaker, Davide Viaggi, who will speak about the bioeconomy and economic literature, looking back, looking ahead, that has been written in collaboration with Fabio Bartolini and Meri Raggi, that are with us this afternoon as well. So Davide, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So the first exercise, as usual, is to try to share the presentation which I didn't try before, but I trust
it works.
It works. Excellent. So thank you very much for the invitation and giving the opportunity of this paper and this presentation. I will start also saying that this topic and this presentation have somehow a special feeling for me, as I was involved in the first editorial board of the journal. And it's very nice to think at what happened during these 10 years. And probably looking back at what we discussed in our first meeting of the board in 2011, it was difficult to imagine at that time to have this opportunity to celebrate now 11 years later. Also, the topic, I think, is particularly connected with the journal because it's connected to the title of the journal itself. And I will try to, besides presenting a little bit the content of the paper, I will try also to make some connection with the history of the journal itself. I think it's a good occasion to do that. As Donato already mentioned, I'm presenting on behalf of the other two co-authors, Fabio and Meri, that also have played and are playing, I think, an important role for the journal. My outline, I will give a bit of introduction, and then I will go through three main chapters that are exactly the same as in the paper. Some thoughts on the statistic related to the bioeconomy and the information we have about this topic. A core part about some topics which are available from the literature and that are related in first instance to things which are more connected to private aspects of economic activity related to the bioeconomy, to move then on issues more related to public goods and to general development objectives and ecosystem services related to the bioeconomy. And I will try to discuss this and conclude with some thought about the future, as Donato already mentioned. So in terms of introduction and objectives, in a way, I would like to start actually with the founding time of the journal. When, as a new association, AIEAA was thinking to open a new journal, we had a long discussion about the title and the topic, of course. And of course, we were trying to check all potential combination of the usual keyword which are in the title of agricultural economics journal. So agricultural economics, food policy, these kind of things. And at some stage during this process, actually, I think it was Jo Swinen that, replying to a message he was in the advisory board of the journal, said, look, guys, if you want to do anything new, switch from agricultural economics, that's old word, to bioeconomy in some way. And after some discussion, we decided to focus the journal on this new topic by that time. And actually, the introductory paper of the first issue was a reflection about whether we were in the process of moving from agricultural economics to a sort of bioeconomy economics as a, let's say, discipline for research and academic activity. And this actually what is behind this Viaggi et al. 2012. That was that paper. Well, 10 years later, we are not in a world where agricultural economics has disappeared. Actually, the opposite, I would say, is very much an important focus of research, same for food. But at the same time, we have a growing literature related to bioeconomy or mentioning the bioeconomy. And that's what we have tried to focus on in this paper. So the idea is to have a review, well, not probably one of those wonderful Prisma-led systematic reviews we are used to see now, but anyway, a reasoned review on this topic that we try to use to identify some pathways for current and future research on this point. When you work on the bioeconomy, typical problem is the definition of the bioeconomy. In every meeting about the bioeconomy at some step, you get into the trouble of what is actually the bioeconomy, what we mean by bioeconomy, and that would require a presentation by itself. But the general idea we are using is to have as a reference the definition given by the European Commission in 2018 that more or less identifies the bioeconomy as the aggregate of sectors using biological resources, including the sectors, their connections, their relationship with the environment, and also the connection with issues related to sustainability, circularity, development, and so on. So I will not get further into details for this, but I'm happy to take up if we want to discuss this further. And I would move to the first of the three main chapters of the paper. First of all, a few words about the statistics and the importance of the bioeconomy issue. We are used to see figures about how important is the bioeconomy in terms of economic size. And what we usually actually see is that the bioeconomy is an important share of the economy in terms of turnover, value added as well. But when we look inside it, actually we found the most of the value is related to some of the most traditional sectors, such as agriculture, the food in particular. I think this does not go against the concept of bioeconomy, but shows that actually there is many traditional sectors that are key for the bioeconomy, and at the same time there are some emerging sectors that are not more relevant, but often more in focus because they are more new. For example, the biofuels to some extent, and sectors related to chemicals, for example. There are also some part of traditional sectors that in connection to the bioeconomy are being strongly revitalized. And for example, all the world of forestry is changing quite a lot perspective, look through the eyes of the bioeconomy. The other point I want to make, of course, you can find those figures in several places, but is also that for the bioeconomy, we are at a stage where statistics are a difficult field. Why? Because statistics, especially data collection procedures, classification, and so on, in the past were not fit for the bioeconomy. So many of the statistics we have of the bioeconomy are used on, are based on statistics of traditional sectors, for example, energy, plus some estimate of the share of information related to, of the share of production or turnover related to bio-based things. So there is for sure in the future, as the sector is growing, a lot of work to be done on the statistical side. And as well, it's also important to recognize that the bioeconomy as a whole is a collection of very different sectors. And in the end, depending on the role of the different sectors, the bioeconomy in the European sense can take completely different logics, depending on how each sector is weighting in each economy. And this also depends on, it can be connected to different issues in statistics. For example, if you look at the role of agriculture, it's completely different if you look at the economic side, or if you look, for example, at employment, where actually agriculture is the big driver of bioeconomy sectors. I don't want to spend much time on this, and I would rather move to some of the economic topics. So in this slide, I've tried to look at the topics of the bioeconomy through a perspective which is one of the most traditional in economics, more or less based on splitting issues in demand side topic, supply side topic, and market. Now, The bioeconomy relates to new product and product that in many cases have potentially or actually a strong impact on consumers. So it's logic that there is a lot on the demand side. And it's also true that there are several studies related to quite a well-established approach to the demand side in terms of willingness to pay of consumers for different attributes related to the bioeconomy or elasticity studies on some topics. But it's also true that some of the most controversial issues related to the bioeconomy, for example, the GMO or even now the new genetic techniques which are proposed, new breeding techniques or whatever is the name, or aspects related to circularity or climate change, for example, have quite a strong impact on perceptions, connection with visions of the future by citizens and consumers. So there are quite a lot of issues in the literature that go beyond willingness to pay or elasticity studies and try to investigate rather acceptance issues, behavioral aspects related to the demand behavior, and now also more and more important, the connection between individual and collective choices. Of course, one of the big topic and question mark in this problem is how preferences are built, and information and communication are very important here. And there is a whole field of research and also of debate about how information can impact in one direction or the other consumers, and also to what extent information can actually be an instrument to adapt demand in the direction sought by society. Of course, there is also a lot of supply side work, and this is something maybe we are more familiar and more, sometimes issues are also more understandable for non-economists. There are issues related to primary production of biomass, because the bioeconomy in the end is based on biomass. There are issues related on the study of different processing, let's say, concept. And here one of the leading concepts is actually the one of biorefinery. There is a lot of work on alternative sources of biomass. All of you know about waste and loss issues, waste processing, byproducts, but also attention to new primary forms of biomass like microalgae and similar things. There is also one big topic about the connection between different streams of biomass, and this is a strong concept. I will come back to this because as part of the bioeconomy is using biotechnologies that basically produce a lot of potential in terms of possibility to split biomass into basic component and reconstructing biomass into final products that somehow increase the degree of connection between different supply streams. Of course, demand and supply also means at some stage studying markets, and here, as we have new products in many cases, a big topic is how to develop new markets. This is something that is really maybe not specific of the bioeconomy, but very much in focus for the bioeconomy, for its nature, and as well this issue of relationship among different markets connected to the point I made before. Here you have also issues related to sustainability and to renewable versus non-renewable resources that on the one hand is some of the backbone of the initial concept of the bioeconomy, and on the other hand is also something very relevant to give a structure to the future of the bioeconomy. On the other hand, the bioeconomy brings to many issues that are much more than this. One of the big points is actually related to organization and organization development in the bioeconomy because of this separability concept that I mentioned before. Increasing separability of processes in a very classical also world of economics means increasing the options of different organizational solution and making the system more complex. This also means going beyond value chain and especially brings to the topic that added value from new product is not something given, but is something that needs to be created through business models and also entrepreneurship. So this is also a big topic in perspective that is growing fast. Many of us were not familiar even with the concept of business models a few years ago, and now is in every paper on the bioeconomy issue. Of course, we know that the bioeconomy is very much related to innovation, so innovation mechanism and even more entrepreneurship are very much in focus on attention now, as well as, of course, regulation that is usually mentioned when someone wants to talk about limitations to new product or new processes for the bioeconomy. I will come later on the issue of conflicts and policies. So before that, I will switch to the next point, which is about ecosystem services, sustainable development, and so on. Much of the bioeconomy discussion actually started from industry and new technologies as an issue more related to processing back 15 or 20 years ago. But now, especially for some sector, it's very clear that the bioeconomy needs to be understood in terms of circular approaches to ecosystem services use and to the benefit of society. And I think it's somehow paradigmatic, this picture. There are many others, but this one that is provided, I think, by the European Forest Institute to show how societies in between what industry can produce and what the ecosystem can actually provide, and how these things are connected among one among the other. But the big point is that when we look all together at these issues, we realize that at the moment we know a lot about the provisioning services and what is directly related with traditional concept of production, while the connection with wider development objectives, ecosystem services, and so on are much less clear. So this is actually a wide field of research in connection to the bioeconomy. Similarly, I should also mention that when we look at the wider picture with many potential dimensions and so on, very often the rhetoric of the bioeconomy is linked to hope or proposal of win-win solutions and somehow also stating that the bioeconomy will solve many problems at the same time. But actually, when you look more carefully, there are many issues where different concepts of bioeconomy bring different trade-offs for different stakeholders and parts of the population. So there are important issues in terms of connecting things and to understanding who's winning and from who's losing from different actions, and also to understand how this may affect different parts of the world. Typical example, many solutions that look at the bioeconomy, especially with extensification, may mean actually outsourcing environmental impact to other parts of the world, which is an issue we know very well as a point of attention. Bringing this issue of tension and contrast to the discussion, I think this is actually the point where economists probably are more needed and have a role in trying to understand how things can go together and how interest can be matched, and also through what interest and instrument actually. So this brings, of course, to perception study, and this is important, to the need to look at scenarios, to the need to work more on data. But something I would like also to highlight concerns methods. we have a lot of now of qualitative studies, a lot of explorative studies, and my perception from the literature is that now more attention is moving to the possibility to use as well models or more quantitative works to address the bioeconomy, which I think is needed more and more actually to address current issues. And this brings me to some conclusions. Okay, we have tried to go through 10 years of literature, considering previous work. And during these 10 years, literature on the bioeconomy has been to a large extent an exploration of how this concept could be addressed with respect to a variety of practical problems. In a way, the field is taking shape. The bioeconomy is at least more known than it was in the past, and also definitions are shaping up. There is more research on the technical side, but still the bioeconomy is far from being a consolidated field of the economy, and is very much connected to innovation strategies and to some specific policies. So it's difficult to recognize a complete bulk of research, except that there are more and more papers that are moving to using the bioeconomy as an umbrella concept. In this context, and having in mind what I showed in the previous slide, especially in terms of trade-off and the different points of view, we could claim that more economic research is needed. Of course, this is a classical conclusions in papers from economics, but I think realistically this is true, and there is also a clear demand from other sectors in terms of a contribution by economics to better understand and better develop the bioeconomy. I think I mentioned many things that are already ongoing as a growing topic, is probably promising for the future, and I would like to mention a few more, or to highlight something that partly I mentioned already. One, of course, is that of innovation, which is connected to organizational issues, to potential for innovation, to analysis and evaluation of innovation, but also understanding innovation in the frame of very wide transition process and changing societal challenges, which is, of course, a big topic, but also a big challenge itself. There is a lot of claim for systemic and holistic views of the bioeconomy, and this is probably something that is strongly needed to make the bioeconomy a reality more than it is now. But we also know it's another challenge, a challenge requiring knowledge of the bioeconomy sectors, and also understanding or probably development of concepts and tools to deal with holistic and systemic views beyond mentioning them, which is a very common exercise today. And final point, we are very often used to think at the demand side, looking at people as consumers. This is a classical things in economics, but now in the framework of bioeconomy, the bioeconomy, and not only the bioeconomy, we need to extend our perception of people to consumers, their role as citizens, and how they interaction through institutions. All things that are not new by themselves, is not something discovered in the bioeconomy, but I think could take a special meaning for the bioeconomy in its role, as I mentioned, as a sort of umbrella concept to understand quite a bulk of different things. I would close here, leaving some dots in the end, just to leave you with open mind for discussion, and just close with thank you very much, and the reference of the paper I've been presenting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Davide. Thank you also for being almost in time. Look, I would like to postpone the discussion after Mantino's speech, but if there are one or two burning questions, possibly requiring short answers, something that is probably on the explanatory side, please do it. Otherwise, we will move to the second speaker. No? Okay, so let's move then to Franco. Thanks, Davide. Franco, you have the floor. Yes. Franco Mantino will present
Thank you.
a paper that is on rural areas between locality and global networks, local development mechanisms, and the role of policies empowering rural actors. Please, Franco.
Can you see the slide?
Yes, but not in presentation mode.
Okay.
It's coming. Now it is okay. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Donato. First of all, I wish to thank the BAE editorial board for this opportunity. And I was in the first editorial board of BAE, and it's a great pleasure for me after 10 years being invited to reflect on the local development in rural areas. My paper is structured in almost 5 points. I start from talking about the diversity of rural areas and which kind of theoretical approaches are behind this definition. Then I will move to explore the main achievement in the huge amount of literature on this topic. It was for me a challenge to read and to systematize all this material, and I will try also to draw some main components of an alternative model for policy design. And finally, some implication for future research and policy. The literature in the last decades highlights that there is a shift from simple indicators of population density and percentage of rural population to more elaborate criteria. There is a strong heterogeneity in defining rural areas across country. Each country has developed its own definition of rurality. And methods combining several criteria have been adopted since rural areas were recognized as a complex and unable to be characterized by a single criterion. So we have 6 different type of approaches. I wish to emphasize here the approach utilized by the OECD. Because why OECD? Because OECD, this approach has gained particular interest in the last decades due to the institutional legitimation of OECD, obviously. This approach is based on functional urban areas. This functional approach has been recently used in this publication you see here, OECD Rural 3.0 policy notes, and is quite used and discussed across OECD countries. Within this approach, rural is operationalized in this way. OECD identifies urban center and community zone, and the sum of urban center and community zone are defined functional urban areas, which are rural areas in this, according this definition. Rural area has two types. Rural areas close to the functional urban area and remote rural. The closeness is defined in terms of time of drive from the functional urban areas. The OECD conceptualization of rural areas diversity clearly from this scheme heavily relies on theories of agglomeration, which explain why urban metropolitan areas accumulate over time comparative advantages and external economies. So rural areas close to these external economies gain from the closeness, obviously. From this definition, according to this classification, applied in our country, only 7 provinces fall in the remote category, and among these very heterogeneous provinces, we have Viterbo, Rieti, Frosinone, Siena, and 2 southern provinces in Sardinia. So the approach, in my view, raised many doubts on the use of this classification for policy purposes. But this approach allows OECD to emphasize the importance of being close to urban center. Rural regions close to the cities, as you can see in this figure, the rural regions displayed higher productivity growth before the 2008 economic crisis, and also after the crisis, rural close to the city is more resilient than rural remote. So this model conceptually explain why remoteness is a danger, is a failure for rural areas, and emphasize obviously the role of agglomeration. In the recent decades, we have a series of interesting European project research that focus rural and local development on different point of view, obviously. I try here to show which, in my view, are the most interesting to explore new ideas on rural and local development. As you can see, there are a lot of projects within the Horizon 2020 framework. If you consider the literature on local rural development, it's possible to distinguish 4 different strands of discipline and theoretical approaches that studied rural diversity and related development process. I classify 4 groups here. The first is dealing with neo-endogenous and networked models within the field of rural sociology and economic geography. The second is typical of regional development and focused on regional convergence and divergence, a divergences model. The third strand of literature is more familiar with us, obviously, because explore the role of endogenous development factors, notably locality and internal networks of actors and firms. So there are different strands of literature, such as cluster, milieu novateur, localized system, that were studied by the French and the Italian economic geography and agriculture economic schools. And finally, there is the strand of that explored the role of policy institution. What role the policy institution play in determining the development potential of any territory? This question has been widely studied in development economics theory. I recall the works of Acemoglu, Robinson, North, and more recently, André Rodriguez Pose. You can find in the paper, and I want to go into this in detail in this fourth strand of literature. You can find an analysis of the evolution, convergence, and divergences among these different approaches in the paper. What is important in this context is to emphasize some relevant research achievements which make more complex the understanding of the disparities as described by the models like the OECD, based on the idea of the one-way functional dominance between urban and rural. The first point that brings new problems in this model is that depolarization across the space is even higher when the gap is measured within the region and within the NUTS3 level. So there are strong differences between the level at the territorial level between the different areas within the NUTS3 level. The second point is that neo-endogenous theories developed over the years in rural geography, rural sociology, and also agricultural economics, emphasize that rural areas as more autonomous functions, deriving, for example, from the territorial and social capital. Think about local agri-food chains, alternative food networks, on horizontal networks. Third point is that peripherality is not typical of the most remote areas. Peripherality is possible, is evident also in intermediate urban and metropolitan areas. A recent research prophecy project found that peripheral areas cover approximately 45% of the European territory, and half of this, only half of this, as lack of access to center and services. Another 46% is represented by area predominantly suffering from poor economic potential and demographic situation, not necessarily linked to the remoteness, okay? And the final point, that is quite important and gained more importance in the recent years is that there is an increasing role of networks. Networks enable connectivity between rural areas, adjacent urban areas, and mainly beyond the geographical proximity. So we have different kind of networks in the literature that have been emphasized. The knowledge and technological networks, the business networks. There is an interesting article of Bettina Bock emphasizing the role of virtual proximity across the space, also for remote rural areas. Linkages with national large business, external companies, third sectors, corporations, and other type of networks. And there are also food networks that go beyond the territory, and political and social networks that increasingly important in understanding why some areas are more active, more dynamic in terms of use of policy, for example. So how can we explain the gap between the official rural areas definition and these research achievements? Well, there are different reasons. First of all, there is, in my view, an insufficient pressure from policymakers for a more detailed official definition of rural areas. Secondly, there is a problem of data. Obviously, we have we have data, but at a level that is too high, and we have lack of data on several aspects at the right geographical scale, in particular, for example, on climate and environmental performance and social challenges, and so on. And also, in my view, there is also a lack of efforts in connecting between different available sources, for example, digital technologies, geolocation and geospatial technique, administrative information. So we have a lot of sources of information that are not connected to each other. And finally, obviously, we have difficulty to get reliable and generalized information on networks. To translate these different disciplinary developments into a practical integrated conceptual approach, we can use a sort of triple helix model where allows us to highlight the main component of the local development process. The first component is the territorial resource system. The second is the institutional system. The third is what I call the network, the system of relations. The first component includes different actors and their specific capabilities. In practice, this component identify physical and human capital underpinning neo-endogenous development. The second component, the institutional system, is quite important, but it must be conceived as not only the institutional system, but also the type of policies that enable local actors to participate to the process. And there must be at least three conditions in this process, in my view, to call institutions as enabling local actors. The first is the capacity of eliciting innovators to emerge and participate in action design and implementation. The second is connecting action and actors by valorizing the current networks or creating new networks. So this type of approach can be used also in policy design. And I wish to emphasize that this approach, in this approach, the role of institutional system is not just to provide money, but is quite different from the usual role of institutions. Some key issue for research and policies. I think that we should move from the functional model to another approach. This approach should consider the territorial capital of rural areas, whereby territorial capital also includes different forms of relational capital and networks. The second point, in my view, is important is that developing a rural area concept, to develop a rural area concept, we need to revise the current urban-rural typology and introduce the criteria based on the variety of function of rural areas. And there is a strong need to fill persistent data gaps at the correct geographical scale that is local in many cases, through the cooperation between different data providers and screening a wide range of possible data sources. In this sense, I think in the next year, there will be two interesting projects financed by Horizon Europe, two twin projects, rustic and granular, that have the main objective to define the concept of rural areas, starting from a different database. And finally, I think that we should focus on how different rural areas face the different transition. There was an interesting exercise in the long-term vision for rural areas conducted by the European Commission recently, where different kind of rural areas have been analyzed under different scenarios. This is a quite interesting exercise that should be repeated and replicated at the national level. And finally, there is a problem as economists to improve the policy impact, not only policy impact analysis, not only to the single instrument of policies, but a mix of different policies, including all the CAP instruments, in order to have a sort of territorial lens to understand which are the impact of the different policies on the diversity of trajectories of rural areas. These are my final comments. Thanks so much for this opportunity again. And if you have some comments, please send any comments to me at my address.
Okay, so thank you very much, Franco, for your quite comprehensive, account of your article. Okay, good. Now the floor is open for comments or questions to the speakers. If you have any, please just raise your hand. Well, I do not see any hands, so just to break the ice. I would like to raise a question to both the speakers, trying to be also a little bit provocative on what you have told us this afternoon. I would like to emphasize a little bit more, ask you to elaborate a little bit more about what are the implications in terms of analysis of what you have done in your paper. Specifically, for instance, Franco talked about rural development as a concept that cannot be explained, or as a process that cannot be explained only by agglomerations and the distance. So he also tried to propose something else beyond these two dimensions. He talked about institutions, policies, networks that are quite important. And at the end, he uses this concept of territorial capital as a sort of an umbrella concept where all those things can be involved. But the problem is still there. I mean, both of you, Franco and Davide, have emphasized that there is a fundamental issue of definition, and I would say on operationalization of what you are proposing. So the question is this, and in the case of Davide as well, you have highlighted that the bioeconomy has been more and more used as an umbrella concept that widened the scope, of traditional fields of activities of agro-food economists. And you also emphasized that there is a need for new tools. But here again, to be provocative, how we can go beyond the pure lip service that everybody is doing when you say that we need a more holistic approach. So can you elaborate a little bit and tell us what is your own and your personal thoughts about doing this, please? Who want to speak first?
No.
Okay, Franco, please.
Yeah. No, it's a question of millions of dollars. That is a right question. Well, there is a problem. Once we are aware that the current definition of rural development or rural diversity or rural disparities are not based on the sufficient analysis, not at the local level, because we have a lot of projects, research projects that went deeper in this mechanism, but in the official statistics, we have a lot of problems in defining at the very detailed and granulated level of analysis, the differences between rural areas. In my view, this is a challenge that should be defined and analyzed in the future with different instruments. In my view, we need more complex data, more complex and diversified source of data to be combined to make an analysis of this type. This now is possible at the local level, but is not possible at the national level when you make comparison between different areas in different situations. So these projects or these research projects witnesses that there is a problem even at European level, not only at the national level, but even at the European level. And the European Commission proposed this topic of research and finances 2 research projects just for this. So it's difficult to answer now to this question because it's a very difficult question to be answered at the European and national level.
Okay. Davide? Thanks.
Yeah, of course, answering from my side is difficult as well. And but I benefited that Franco went first, so I had 1 more minute to think about. Well, it's of course, if you look at the data that you would like to have, you end up with asking always too much, which means impossible. I guess also some of you received a questionnaire from the Biomonitor project these days. At least I filled it yesterday, and it was asking about the best level of disaggregation and the best and what kind of indicators would be needed for the bioeconomy. And I realized that I filled in always saying that every indicator is important, and I would like to have it at the more detailed level of disaggregation, which is probably not helpful, but is what we as researchers would like to have. I think this is potentially an issue, but it's also difficult to see in terms of data what we need, because we use data to answer to policy problems, and policy problems are very vague at the moment. We have very nice strategies on the bioeconomy, very comprehensive, but then when you have to look at the actual policies, either in the CAP or outside, sometimes you have very sectoral policies that probably don't need so many data. For example, you have energy measures, you have some measures related to climate or to biogas production, which are often very focused. In terms of more instrument, of course, we can address complexity and holistic things with very nice system thinking tools, the system dynamics modeling and so on, which I think are very useful to give a representation of problems, but not necessarily to say something strong on what should be done. From our side, but this also comes from my background, I think that one of the big challenges is actually connecting territorial models of farming and also land management with value chain or network modeling that represents more the working of what comes next. Because for the bioeconomy, the big gap now is that we have people thinking at primary sector only as a source of biomass, whatever it is, and becomes very simple to say, okay, we have 30% land abandoned in Italy, we can cultivate and produce a lot of biomass without thinking of where this land is and what it can actually produce. And on the other end, we have agriculture that received incentives related to land use, basically, without knowing what you have downstream. So I think this is the point where quantitative methods could really help, but it's also difficult to do because, of course, you need data, but you also need concept to match these two dimensions, of course.
Yeah.
And circularity, of course. Circularity is another topic that we mention in every sentence now, but having good models representing circularity, I think, is still quite a challenge.
Yeah, this is also what is my feeling. So we can acknowledge that there is a fundamental data need, but of course, as you said, Davide, the data you need, depends on what is the conceptualization that you have behind it. So I think that even stronger is the need to go beyond just pure conceptualization, which is of course a first step, but what is the theory that is behind it and what is the we might use on that. And I'm afraid that for such complex concepts and issues, it is, well, a damn challenging, but also very interesting task. So there is a lot of to do, especially for the youngsters. Okay, I think that Roberto Enke has raised his hand. Please, Roberto, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Donato. I have a question for Davide. Looking at the bioeconomy or to a bioeconomic approach to economy, my question is if this raises the issue, a lot of ethical issues that I think that should be, at least discussed and dealt with. Which of course include the production side, the demand side, the market, and my question is if you found contributions on that issues that are rising along with the rising of interest in the bioeconomy, and also if as an association or as a journal, we should try to stimulate a bit more the debate about the ethical issues of the bioeconomy. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, which is, by the way, another difficult one. Of course, there are some fields of the bioeconomy that are strongly associated with ethical topics, especially things related to biotechnologies on, for example, genetic modification of this kind of things, and even more if you go to human bioeconomy related to the medical side. And there also there is an attempt of conceptualization, also going to the philosophical side of the topic. For example, you have concepts such as biovalues or similar things that connect, let's say, from a philosophical point of view, economic thinking with ethical thinking, which I'm not an expert of, but I think it is for sure something very challenging. Also, I feel there is a lot of potentially ethical things when we quite well, naively, I would say, sometimes mention the possibility of changing preferences through information or through communication or through other means, because a lot of the discussion on the bioeconomy is very often on how to make people change their mind in such a way that they appreciate more the kind of products we are producing through research, for example. This is very common, and so I think for sure this is something to bring in the debate. I'm not sure it is something that we can really deal with in making proposals or something we should be aware of, but for sure I think we need to be at least aware of the ethics side of something where preferences, behavior, and so on is claimed to be needed to be something dynamic, something that needs to be changed, because that goes directly into values and into ethical side. So we should do more. At the same time, not using the word ethics as something that should stop thinking in economic terms, of should stop thinking on some problems, because the ethical side itself is dynamic. So it's not a boundary that we should take as an order to our thinking, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Davide. Other comments or questions from the floor? No questions? Let me ask again something that is for both of you, because looking at the references that you have listed there in the contents of your presentation, it seems to me that this reflects well what's going on in developed countries, especially Europe, okay? But if you had to change a little bit the perspective, looking at developing countries, what are the major implications or changes about what you have told us this afternoon that you would like to emphasize? This time, let's start with Davide.
Yes, let's start with Davide. Well, I think much of the use of the term bioeconomy and also the strategy indeed comes from developed countries. However, we have also quite important examples coming from, say, developed or recently developing or recently developed countries that actually have an economy which is strongly based on natural resources. Take Brazil or Malaysia or some of these. And so there is clearly a literature related to the bioeconomy also from these countries, and also to further developing countries related to, I would say, innovative ways of putting value these resources they have, not just for food, not just for nature, but also to create a modern economy based on products that are valuable for society and that go beyond eating and heating. The other point I would say for developing countries, which I think is very important for the bioeconomy, is the ownership of natural resources and biological resources in particular. You know that there is a lot of emphasis now on these Nagoya protocols, or on the property of biological resources, which in the view of the bioeconomy and ecosystems, I would say as well, is something that directly involves developing countries, and is also key to have a development of the bioeconomy which is more balanced than we are used to think when we just look at the bioeconomy as biotech, modern biotech applied to whatever comes to the table.
Before giving the floor to Franco, any mention to distributional issues and issues of access, with specific reference to different strata of population in developing countries?
Yes, it is something that is in the literature. Maybe that side is growing for sure, but anyway, at least bioeconomy brings directly to access to land and access to water, because besides natural resources, and as well there is a lot of emphasis on small size local development initiatives related to the bioeconomy. It's difficult for me, because I'm not really an expert on that, to say if it is, to judge if it is something inherent to the bioeconomy or just a combination of fancy approaches to economic issues in developing countries, because sometimes it's difficult to guess. But on the other hand, there is a lot of bioeconomy which needs economies of scale, especially when they look at the biorefinery concept in Europe. That, of course, excludes some parts of population unless you look at them as biomass producer, which is, in my view, it's actually a downgrading of farmers. Because farmers as producers of food, I feel, are something more than producers of biomass.
And of course, an intellectual property rights problem plus,
yeah, sure.
Plus the changing locus of research nowadays that is going towards privatization. Sorry, Franco, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, if I have to think to the replication of this analysis and the implication for developing countries, I can say that the three elements that I focus on are equally important, even in developing countries. Endogenous resources, institutions, and networks are similarly important in this case, but probably the weight, the relative weight of these three components are different in developing countries. And also, I feel that the role of institution is much more critical in developing countries because we have not established and consolidated institutions at national level, and very often these institutions are substituted for the international organization role. I don't know what kind of networks are in developing countries and how networks can play a role. Probably in that case, local networks are much more relevant than so the proximity networks are much more important than the networks that go beyond the area. Probably just because the possibility of communication with other areas are much more limited. And finally, I suspect that the availability of data to define the difference of rural areas are much more critical in developing countries, because in some cases there is a problem of consolidated statistical system at the national level or a regional level.
Now, networks, especially informal networks, are definitely very important. I would say that there is also, only a word of caution that I would like to raise, because we have to go beyond this over-romanticized, view of, I would say, informal networks as something that is always good. Now there is an ever-increasing literature that shows that sometimes it is like that, some other times they could be a block to development. Stop development, it can be something that frees actually the situation as it is. Okay, so any other comment or question from the floor? No? Okay, may I just raise last question from my side to both of you. This is probably the 1 billion question, because I would like to see if you have to try to identify what is the connecting point or a bridge between the two topics that you have talked about. Is there anything that you would like to emphasize, just to make the picture even a little bit more complex than it is really? The topics are complex, but let's make it more complex now.
The concept of sustainability is a big common point for both the bioeconomy and the rural development, local development system, and also the role of policies is quite strong in both cases.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Franco. Davide?
Yeah, I would agree on sustainability and ecosystem services related things, because actually what is happening also with the bioeconomy is that basically you have an expansion of human action into the management of ecosystems beyond the transformation of biomass, which somehow is interconnecting human action with also territorial issues that were mentioned by Franco. And I think this is also key for the bioeconomy because it's living on biological resources, and being actually able to create values in rural areas is key for it to work. Otherwise, it will remain transforming biomass on the industrial side with what is left out of the other activities.
Okay, great. It is 3:25. I think that it was a very nice presentation. First of all, discussion. I would like to thank again the two speakers, and I really look forward to meet all of you in person in Viterbo next month. Filippo, sorry, do you want to say something as a president of the association?
No, just to remind what I said at the beginning, that next vote will be the election day, the 13th of May, so don't miss to vote and to renew the board. And there is an open position to be editor of the BAE journal. So we are looking for a new member of the editor of the board, and that's it. So I wish you all the best, and to meet you, all of you, in Viterbo again.
Okay.
The achievement for all of us. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you all, and have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao.
Thank you.